It is a January night in the year 1700 in a fishing village on the coast of Japan. The sea is calm. There has been no earthquake, no storm, no warning of any kind. And then, in the middle of the night, the ocean simply rises. Water pushes into the streets, floods the rice warehouses, lifts boats onto the land. The villagers flee to high ground and watch the sea surge in, again and again, through the night. In the morning, the village officials do what Japanese officials have always done. They write it down. And they record their confusion in a single strange detail. This tsunami came from nowhere. No one felt the ground shake. For 300 years, that mystery sat in the archives. A wave without an earthquake, an orphan tsunami. And when scientists finally solved it, the answer was not in Japan at all. The earthquake that flooded those villages happened 5,000 miles away, on the coast of North America, on a fault line that runs from Northern California to Canada. A fault capable of magnitude 9. A fault that drops the American coastline into the sea when it ruptures. And here is the sentence that should hold you to the end of this video. That fault runs on a schedule. The schedule says it ruptures every few centuries, and the last one was 326 years ago. This is the Cascadia subduction zone, and by the end of this video, you will understand why many scientists consider it the single most dangerous fault in North America. More dangerous than San Andreas, more dangerous than anything in California, and why the emergency plans for its next rupture read less like disaster response, and more like the recovery of a lost region. Let us start with what Cascadia actually is, because it is a different kind of fault from the ones most Americans know. San Andreas is a sideways fault, two plates grinding past each other, like two hands sliding. Cascadia is something far more powerful. It is a subduction zone, a place where an entire ocean plate, the Juan de Fuca plate, is diving underneath North America. The fault between them is not a vertical crack. It is a vast sloping boundary, roughly 700 miles long, running offshore from Northern California, past Oregon, past Washington, up to Vancouver Island. Subduction zones are the only faults on Earth capable of the very largest earthquakes, the magnitude 9s. Japan, 2011, a subduction zone. Sumatra, 2004, a subduction zone. Chile, 1960, the largest earthquake ever recorded, a subduction zone. Cascadia is built exactly like them. It is the same class of machine. And here is the detail that changes everything. The fault is stuck. The ocean plate is still moving, relentlessly, a little more than an inch every year, diving under the continent. But the boundary between the plates is locked by friction, and has been for centuries, so the coastline itself is being compressed, slowly crushed and dragged, like a spring being loaded. This is not a metaphor. GPS stations across the Pacific Northwest measure it directly. The coast of Oregon and Washington is bulging, rising, tilting inland, millimeter by millimeter, year after year, as the continent's edge is bent backwards by the stuck fault beneath it. Every year the fault stays locked. The spring loads a little more. And when the friction finally fails, everything the fault has stored for centuries releases in a matter of minutes. Now, how do we know it ruptures at all? This is where the story becomes a detective case. And it is one of the great scientific detective cases of the modern era, because for most of the 20th century, nobody knew this fault was dangerous. Seattle grew, Portland grew, highways, ports, millions of people, all built on the assumption that the Pacific Northwest was earthquake quiet. The fault offshore was known to exist, but it was silent. No great quakes in written American history. Some scientists argued it was simply sliding smoothly, harmless. The first clue came from the trees. Along the coastal rivers of Washington and Oregon, there are groves of dead cedar and spruce, gray, bare, standing in tidal marshes. Locals call them ghost forests. They are eerie places, hundreds of bleached trunks rising out of salt grass, trees that have been dead for centuries yet still stand, preserved by the very salt water that killed them. For generations, people assumed they were nothing special, old trees drowned by some slow shift of the river. In the 1980s, A geologist named Brian Atwater paddled into those marshes, dug into the soil around the dead trees, and found something disturbing: a clean layer of sand, the signature of a tsunami, sitting on top of a buried forest floor. And beneath that, the same pattern repeating: older buried soils, older sand sheets, the same story written over and over down through the mud. The trees had not died slowly. The land they stood on had suddenly dropped, several feet in an instant, plunging the forest into salt water, and a wave had swept across it as it drowned, killed by the sea, all at once. That is what subduction zones do when they rupture. The bent coastline snaps downward, the land itself falls. The second clue was the timing. Scientists took samples from those dead trees and read their rings. The trees had lived through the growing season of 1699 and never grew again. Whatever killed them happened between the autumn of 1699 and the spring of 1700. And the third clue was waiting in Japan. Those meticulous village records of the orphan tsunami, the flood with no earthquake, were dated January in the year 1700. Researchers ran the wave physics backwards across the Pacific, and it all locked together into a single astonishing conclusion. On the evening of January 26, 1700, at about 9 o'clock at night, the entire Cascadia fault ruptured in a magnitude 9 earthquake. The American coastline dropped. A tsunami tens of feet high struck the Pacific Northwest within minutes, and 10 hours later, the same wave flooded villages in Japan. Science recovered the exact date and hour of an earthquake that no written American record ever described. It is one of the most precise reconstructions of a prehistoric disaster ever achieved. Picture that night from this side of the ocean. 9 in the evening, midwinter, full darkness on the Pacific coast. The people of the coastal villages are indoors, fires burning, storms rolling through as they always do in January. And then the ground begins to move, and does not stop, for minute after minute, in the dark. Then the land itself settles downward. Then, before there is time to understand any of it, the sea arrives. Everything we know says the wave came within half an hour of the shaking, in the cold, at night, with no moon recorded and no warning possible. When we talk about the next rupture, we are not imagining a hypothetical. We are describing something that has already happened to that exact coastline, to people standing on it, and the only difference next time is that millions more people will be standing there. But there were witnesses on this side of the ocean too, and their accounts survived. The native peoples of the coast, who had lived there for thousands of years, carried the event in their oral histories. Stories from Vancouver Island and the Washington coast describe a night when the earth shook so long that people could not stand, and the sea came in and swallowed villages whole. One community at a place called Pachena Bay, according to the accounts, was taken by the water in the night and never seen again. For generations, those stories were treated as legend. They were not legend. They were eyewitness testimony, passed down, describing the last time Cascadia went off. And once scientists knew what to look for, they found the deeper record, off the coast, on the ocean floor. Every great Cascadia earthquake shakes loose underwater landslides that settle into distinct layers of sediment. Researchers have pulled cores from the deep sea and counted those layers like tree rings. The count goes back 10,000 years, and it shows roughly 40 great earthquakes in that span. Cascadia is not a fault that ruptured once. It is a fault with a heartbeat. The intervals vary, sometimes a couple of centuries, sometimes 5, averaging somewhere in the range of 300 to 500 years for the full fault, with the southern section, off Oregon and Northern California, appearing to rupture more often, on average closer to every 2.5 centuries. The last full rupture was 1700, 326 years ago. Do the arithmetic yourself. On the southern section, we are past the average interval already. For the full fault, we are inside the window. This is what scientists mean when they use the word overdue. Not that the earthquake is scheduled for next Tuesday, but that we are now living in the part of the cycle where the next one belongs. So, let us do what this channel does. Let us walk through the next rupture, the way the emergency planners have modeled it, because they have modeled it in extraordinary detail. It begins offshore, likely with no warning beyond a few seconds of alert from the earthquake sensors. the fault unzips, possibly along its entire 700-mile length, releasing centuries of stored compression in Seattle, Portland, Tacoma, Eugene, Vancouver. The shaking builds, and then it just keeps going. This is the signature of a magnitude 9. Not 30 seconds of shaking like a California quake, but 4 to 6 minutes. Long enough to say goodbye to everything unbolted in your house. Long enough for soft river soils under Portland and the Seattle waterfront to liquefy. Long enough for older brick buildings, and the region has tens of thousands of them, to fail. Bridges built before anyone knew this fault existed, highway overpasses, aging pipelines. 4 to 6 minutes is an eternity of load that much of this infrastructure was never designed to carry. And while the cities are still shaking, the coastline performs the act this video is named for, the bent edge of the continent, loaded for 3 centuries, snaps seaward and downward. In minutes, the outer coast drops, in places by as much as 6 feet. Beaches sink, harbors sink, coastal towns physically lower themselves towards sea level, permanently. Land that was dry for 300 years becomes tidal flat. Streets that never flooded flood on every high tide from that day forward. The maps of the coast, quite literally, have to be redrawn. The ghost forests were created in exactly this way, and the next rupture will create new ones. Then the sea comes back. The same sudden movement of the seafloor that dropped the coast also shoves the ocean above it, and that displaced water races outward in both directions. One wave crosses the Pacific toward Japan, just like 1700. The other turns toward America, and it does not have far to travel. The first tsunami surges reach the outer coast in as little as 15 to 30 minutes after the shaking begins. Along the beaches of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, the water can arrive tens of feet high, in some modeled locations approaching 100 feet where the seafloor funnels it. The evacuation plan for the outer coast is brutally simple. The shaking itself is the warning, and when the ground finally stops moving, you walk uphill, immediately, because the clock is already running. Coastal communities know this. Some towns have built evacuation towers, vertical refuges, because parts of the coast are so flat that there is no high ground within reach. On the Washington coast, one school district did something no American community had ever done before. They rebuilt their elementary school with a reinforced roof deck designed as a tsunami refuge, a platform above the modeled wave height, strong enough to hold the entire school and hundreds of neighbors. Because the honest calculation showed their children could never outrun the water to natural high ground. The school stands there today, a normal school on a normal street, with a lifeboat built into its bones. Think about that. American towns, today, constructing towers and refugees to climb above a wave they know is coming. That is not paranoia. That is what taking the geological record seriously actually looks like. The inland cities, Seattle and Portland, are shielded from the open ocean tsunami, but not from the earthquake itself. Consider one detail from Portland that planners lose sleep over. The vast majority of the fuel for the entire state of Oregon, the gasoline, the diesel, the jet fuel, flows through a single cluster of aging tank farms on the Willamette River, built decades ago, on exactly the kind of soft riverside soil that liquefies in long shaking. If those tanks and pipes fail in the rupture, the region loses its fuel supply at the precise moment it needs fuel for every generator, every ambulance, every rescue vehicle. One site, one point of failure, built before anyone knew. Multiply that logic across the region, hospitals that predate modern codes, water systems crossing landslide zones, and you begin to see why the planning documents read the way they do. And this is where the federal planning scenarios become sobering reading. They describe millions of people affected, tens of thousands of buildings damaged or destroyed, highways severed by hundreds of landslides across the coastal ranges, ports wrecked, fuel supplies disrupted, and coastal communities cut off entirely, reachable for a time only by boat or helicopter. A senior federal emergency official once summarized the working assumption in a single grim sentence, that everything west of Interstate 5 would, in the immediate aftermath, effectively be cut off from the rest of America. The plans talk about restoring electricity in weeks or months in the hardest hit zones, not days. They talk about relocating populations, This is not a disaster the region bounces back from in a news cycle. It is a disaster measured in years. Now, the honest section. Because this channel does not do fake countdowns. Let me tell you exactly what the science says about likelihood. No one can predict the date. Anyone who gives you a date is lying. What scientists can do is state the odds. The published estimates put the chance of a full margin magnitude 9 at roughly 10 to 15% in the next 50 years, and the chance of a major rupture on the southern section, a magnitude 8 class event off Oregon and Northern California, at around 1 in 3 over the same window, 1 in 3 within the span of a home mortgage. Those are the same kinds of odds we discussed for New Madrid, except this fault's maximum event is far larger, and its tsunami gives the coast only minutes. There is also real progress to report, and it matters. The Pacific Northwest now has an earthquake early warning system, a network of sensors that can detect the first energy of the rupture offshore, and push alerts to phones seconds to tens of seconds before the heavy shaking arrives inland. Seconds sound like nothing, until you realize what seconds buy. Trains braking before the shaking derails them, surgeons lifting scalpels, bridge gates closing, elevators opening at the nearest floor, firehouse doors rising before the frame twists and jams them shut, and you, wherever you are, getting under the table before the room starts moving instead of after. Schools on the coast run tsunami drills. Some districts have rebuilt schools on high ground or added vertical refuges. Building codes in Seattle and Portland are far stronger than they were a generation ago. The region that spent a century not knowing this fault existed now studies it as intensely as anywhere on Earth. The gap between what is known and what is ready is still wide, but it is closing, and every year it closes further. The next rupture kills fewer people. That is the entire point of understanding a fault before it moves. So, 3 futures, the honest way to hold Cascadia. Future 1, the most likely in any single year, silence. The fault stays locked. The spring loads a little more. The Northwest enjoys another beautiful, quiet year between rehearsals. Most years are this year, and it is entirely possible the fault stays quiet beyond our lifetimes. Future 2, the partial rupture. The southern section goes alone. A magnitude 8 class earthquake off Oregon and Northern California. A regional catastrophe, a serious tsunami on the southern coast, and the loudest wake-up call in American seismic history, because everyone will know the rest of the fault is still loaded. Future 3, the full margin event. The repeat of 1700. 700 miles of fault, magnitude 9, 6 minutes of shaking, the coast dropping, the wave returning, and the largest disaster response operation the United States has ever attempted. It has happened roughly 40 times in 10,000 years. It will happen again. The only unknown is the date. Here is my honest opinion, after everything the research shows. Cascadia frightens scientists more than California for one core reason. California's danger is famous, and Cascadia's danger is new knowledge sitting on top of old construction. San Andreas cannot produce a magnitude 9. Cascadia can, and it aims that power at a region that only discovered the threat within living memory, where much of what stands was built in the age of ignorance. The 1700 earthquake left us everything we need: the ghost forests, the Japanese records, the native histories, the layers on the seafloor. The fault documented itself 40 times and mailed us the evidence. The question Cascadia really asks America is simple. What does a nation do when it finally reads the mail? So now I want to hear from you. Did you know the exact date of America's last magnitude 9 before this video? And do you live in the zone, Washington, Oregon, Northern California, or on the coast itself? Drop your city or state in the comments. I read everyone. And if you live on that coastline, tell me honestly, do you know your evacuation route? If this video taught you something the news never did, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and subscribe with notifications on. Because next, we cover a mountain above Seattle's suburbs that scientists watch around the clock. A volcano that does not even need to erupt to bury entire towns, because the mountain itself is slowly falling apart. That story is next. The ground beneath America is speaking. Make sure you are listening.